Welcome to Founders Flow, a bite-sized podcast where we dive into the minds of startup founders, uncovering the tactics it takes to build today's challenges and tomorrow's solutions. On today's podcast, John Welchel, founder of PowerPicker, how John is helping businesses save thousands on energy bills. Hey John, thanks for joining Founders Flow. Before we dive in, I'd love to learn more about your startup journey so far.
Sure. Hey Matt, it's great to be here. So my startup journey, I started PowerPicker a little under a year ago, and we help people and businesses save money on their power bill, basically, by swapping them between suppliers automatically. We find them cheaper power than their utility and take a cut of the savings. If we can't find cheaper power, it's free, and we pretty much guarantee you'll never lose money. We'll make you whole otherwise. So I started that a little under a year ago. I've been working on it since then, and learning a lot more about the energy space, the retail market space, things like that.
And so it sounds like you moved to Pennsylvania. You maybe heard about the deregulated energy space. For those not familiar, I think there's around 20-ish states in the US that have a deregulated market. Could you tell people more about how that works?
For sure. This is a great question because a lot of people aren't familiar with this. So in the energy market, you have the utility or the distributor who brings power to your door. And you never have a choice in that. It's always the same company. But behind them, there are lots of different companies generating the power. Fossil fuels and non-fossil fuels, different types of companies, including the utility. And in a handful of states, as you said, about 20, you have the right as a consumer to choose among the suppliers behind the distributor who are actually generating your power. So you can choose clean energy if you want. You can try to find cheaper power if you want. And in these deregulated states, you have the option of doing that.
And it sounds like in the deregulated states, there's a lot of suppliers competing for one another. And so I'm imagining that drives prices down, but also gives consumers maybe so many options where it's really confusing. I would love to learn about how PowerPicker, what makes PowerPicker unique?
Yeah, for sure. So you're absolutely right. It's confusing for consumers. And there is price competition. It varies from state to state how much there is. It's confusing for consumers, one, because they're not even aware of it. There's an education problem. But then on top of that, in the market, it's kind of a historically scammy market. So people are used to door-to-door sales people coming by. They're used to being accosted on the street. Someone says, show me your power bill. They have friends who have been burned by this where they sign up for what seems like a cheap rate. Maybe it's cheap for 1 month, 3 months, something like that. And then it becomes variable and jacks up on them. And they kind of swear off the whole thing. So when I moved to Pennsylvania and learned more about this, because Pennsylvania is one of the better states to do this in, I thought to myself, one, this is kind of silly. Like, you should just get cheaper power if it's available. And as a software engineer, I thought this is something I could totally automate. I don't want to do this for myself. And two, I thought, what would it be like if you just treated the people actually buying the power, the customers, as the customers rather than the product? So with that in mind, I thought, let me approach automating this and do something differently where I say, I get no kickbacks, I get no commission, you're not the product, this is shared savings. So if I save you $1, I take 20 cents. The more I save you, the more money I make. So our incentives are totally aligned, and I'm completely bought into trying to ensure you never get a high rate and you never get burned.
That's an awesome benefit for all the consumers out there. I want to dive into that a little bit more. So you're helping residential, small businesses, sort of like who are you targeting with PowerPicker?
Yeah, great question. So we started out with residential and have since started to move more and more towards small business, small, medium businesses. It's interesting because the ideal person here managing a lot of properties with some non-trivial energy usage who's looking basically to boost their kind of profit margins. So customer initiatives we're excited about include things like short-term rentals, folks with a bunch of Airbnbs, a bunch of VRBOs, franchises, restaurants, various coffee shops, things like that, where they've got 3, 5, 10 locations. Some might be across state lines. And for them to manage this themselves, there's really more bookkeeping than it's worthwhile. But when you add up all the properties and all of the spend, it actually can help them out. There's the really high end of the market where you might have big industrial producers, and for them, they're dealing with more manual negotiations because their spend is so high. So we're trying to find that kind of sweet spot where you're using enough, where it's worthwhile both for you and us to make this happen, but not so much that you're basically hiring someone to do this for you bespoke.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're moving upstream. Maybe residents are sort of like getting too many advertisements for this. I know that I'm constantly getting mail from these suppliers. So there are different incentives between residential and commercial. Like you were saying, you might be able to cut operational expenses if a restaurant has really high energy bills, or if someone has a multiple Airbnbs that they manage. I can see that being really useful. So you automate things on the back end. So what does it take to sign up? Is it like a lengthy process, or walk me through that?
Yeah, so we want to make it as easy and frictionless as possible to sign up for PowerPicker. And so when you sign up, you basically provide kind of basic personal information, your name, your email, things like that. And then the key thing is we basically link to your utility accounts. And this is important for two reasons. So the first reason is it makes sign up super easy, because anything we need to manage your supplier, your utility already knows about you. So we don't have to ask you for your address, your account numbers, where your accounts are, what type of rates they have. All of that we can just get from your utility to make sign up a lot easier. Two, this is how we do our kind of innovative pricing model. We basically need to know each month how much did you spend on energy and how much did you use, so we can calculate what would you have spent if you weren't using PowerPicker. And by doing that, we basically make our incentive aligned model work well.
And your background's in software engineering. I know you maybe have worked at bigger tech companies as well as maybe started a couple companies. And so I imagine that it's really simple on the front end, but the back end is probably a lot more complex, but you're trying to simplify that for the user, right? So can you talk more about how the switching works? There's nothing I need to do as the user. I don't have to go and choose every month. It's just automated for me on the back end.
Correct. It's automated. You do have a choice if you want to do renewable energy only. So we can do that and say, hey, great, we're going to give you 100% renewable energy.
Great.
But after you sign up, the nice thing about our service is that it's kind of one and done. I guess if you move or you add new properties, sure, we want to know about that. But otherwise, we just send you an email every month saying, here's your rate, here's how much money you've saved, maybe here's how many months are left, and we'll make sure to swap you if it's about to expire, or hey, we found a cheaper rate, we'll go ahead and swap you now. So yes, this is exactly like more complex on the back end, particularly with all the different suppliers who exist and different states exist. And we're doing all of that so all these people don't have to do it themselves.
Well, I love that. You also help with gas, I believe, because Pennsylvania is a big natural gas state. Can you talk more about gas? I know that gas prices are continuing to increase as well.
Yeah, so we do gas as well. I will say power is a much more meaningful way to save than gas for the most part. The number of alternative suppliers offering gas is typically fewer, and the price disparity is smaller. So if you're a residential consumer, at least say in Pennsylvania, for example, the odds that doing this yourself are worthwhile is pretty low. Like it might be like $2 a month, right?
Yeah.
So we focus mostly on power, but we do gas for those for whom it's meaningful.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the energy market. Since you've been in this for about a year now, there's a lot of change. We're in this huge energy transition towards more renewables, towards more consumer choice, whether that's for putting solar and batteries on your home, but also switching suppliers to more clean energy. What
Yes.
sort of changes are you seeing when it comes to how people pay for energy now and in the future?
Yeah, so you touched on a few things there. One big one is distributed energy. So states and the national government are trying to incentivize more distributed energy. And one big way that happens is through net metering, so kind of paying you to put energy back on the grid. People are getting batteries, EVs, things like that have more storage capacity. But another big factor is time of use, where you might be charged more for power at certain times of day than other times of day. All of this is ways of trying to make the consumer more exposed to what the actual cost of power is. Like the cost of power changes a lot during the day, and it's also not just about how much power you use. It's about what is your kind of maximum load at peak. It is about how much capacity do you need for us to have on hand, whether or not we're actually using it. There's a variety of things that go on behind the market, and I think we're basically heading towards a world where consumers are exposed to that more, because think about it, in the 90s, the idea of having someone kind of do really sophisticated time of use wouldn't make sense. Manually, they couldn't do it. There's a risk they'd shoot themselves in the foot, kind of like what happened in Texas in 2021, which we can talk about. But today, we have amazing hardware, software, machine learning algorithms, things that could basically say, hey, for your home, what kind of temperature do you like? When do you need your car charged? Tackle a few of those top things, and then say, great, we've got it. We'll work to make sure energy is cheap as possible by using energy when it's cheaper. So I think there's a world in which we basically go more and more towards that to make the grid much more resilient.
Yeah, that's a big thing, especially right now with the heat index. Excuse me, the heat index is above 100 in Pennsylvania and New York
Yep.
today. Do you have plans to integrate more of this time of use rate plan into the product eventually? I know that like users with electric vehicles or solar typically join these time of use plans at a higher rate because they're able to sort of generate their own energy and export it when they want. Do you have any plans to integrate that?
Yes. So there's a lot of different ways PowerPicker could go. One vision I have for the business is moving from where we are today, which is supplier management, to being an actual supplier, and then to incorporating these more sophisticated pricing mechanics. Because there's so much opportunity around almost like home management, whether it's smart thermostats, smart electrical panels, smart HVAC, things like that. Today, they're not as sophisticated as be required to be exposed to the more dynamic pricing mechanics because no tariffs are offered that way. And no one offers a tariff because there aren't devices that allow people to do it in a reasonable way. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. And so attacking that by using PowerPicker as kind of a foothold in the industry is one of the more exciting visions I have for the future of the business.
Yeah, I love that. I think you found a great wedge. You have a unique proposition, value prop compared to all the other suppliers out there. And it sounds like you do have a vision for the platform to sort of integrate more into use cases for residents and small businesses. I guess I want to ask more about general problems you're seeing in the energy space. So you've been in it about a year. You've probably looked at it for many more years. Are there other problems that you think we should start to tackle?
Yeah, when I was doing research about this space, a big one that was interesting to me was the challenge around grid interconnections. So we as a society use a lot of power. We want to use more, like energy allows us to do things with our lives and be productive and create lots of interesting products and services. When you want to add more power to the grid, it's a pretty lengthy process working with these utilities to get connected to the grid. And it can affect a lot of the viability of projects for developers. They don't know if they're going to get approved. They don't know if they are approved, how much they'll have to spend on grid improvements. They don't know how long it will take. FERC, the kind of federal regulatory commission, has passed some new guidelines and rules that I think will improve this, but more could be done. And there's this interesting tension between the utilities and individual consumers as technology changes, where as people put on solar panels and batteries, the utility becomes less and less of a supplier of day-to-day energy and more resiliency backup and kind of like the power supplier of last resort. And some states are already facing that pretty substantially. It's affecting the utilities revenue model and things like that. The grid interconnect is related to this. If they can't get more energy online, data centers just say we're going to contract privately to like build energy or bring in energy close to us, because if you can't provide it, we need to find it ourselves. So I think there's interesting tension there with how is the grid going to expand and how quickly can they do so in a way that doesn't compel consumers to find alternatives.
Yeah. You hear about the utility death spiral where consumers have more choice to be their own energy generation nowadays. And you see something like FERC passing this distributed energy bill for states to sort of figure that out. Obviously, California is a classic example of all these incentives kind of falling out of the way. And they're trying to figure it out. It looks like solar and batteries are taking off in that state, but it's causing a lot of problems for the utility. And then you see something like Maryland, who just passed a virtual power plant bill, which allows EVs to sort of export energy to the grid. So there's all these things happening with the grid, and I think it's important to maybe align your platform, PowerPicker, with where this grid is going, even
Yes.
if it's just right now you're going to be a supplier and save people on bills. I think that's a interesting wedge towards this greater grid issues that we're facing.
Yeah, and it could go a lot of different ways. It depends on how fast solar panels and battery prices continue to drop. Depends on how fast they're adopted, and it depends on kind of quickly utilities change and adjust.
Before we hop off here, I want to learn more about sort of like if you had anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of the deregulated energy market. So I know this is your bread and butter. If you had anything you would want to tell customers before they were to look at PowerPicker, what would you want to say?
Yeah, the main thing I would say is that a lot of people have options and access to this and don't know it. So if you're in Pennsylvania, if you're in Maryland, if you're in Ohio, Massachusetts, like you should definitely look into this. Texas, Connecticut, there are even more states. It varies how much kind of availability there is, but this is something you should definitely look into. Education is one of the biggest problems I find with PowerPicker and making PowerPicker work. We're not selling toothbrushes or candy bars where people already know kind of what the value prop is. Tons of people I talk to say, I thought I had to use Pico. I thought I had to use Con Ed. I didn't even know this was possible. So educating yourself is kind of the first situation. And once you're aware that this is possible, tools like PowerPicker, I think, are a great way to make it work if you don't want to do it yourself.
That's great. All right, we're going to wrap. Thanks so much for joining Founders Flow, John.
Yeah, Matt, thanks so much. It's great chatting.